They found it buried in the radiation-choked silence of what used to be Earth's atmosphere, a narrow-band transmission, wrapped in dead code and leaking through fractured quantum filaments. It shouldn't have existed. The Empire had sterilized the surface, incinerated every living cell, and rendered the crust into glass. But the signal remained dormant, waiting. A voice embedded in the ruins. Message class, Omega Red. Source, extinct civilization. Human. The Empire catalogued it and moved on. Earth was just one more system pacified under the banners of order and unity. Another example for the archives. How stubborn primitives burn under enlightened rule. But the message didn't fade. It pulsed, irregular and alive, like a dying heartbeat. That alone unnerved them. When the Empire first discovered humanity, they'd expected chaos. Their scouts had observed fragmented governments, erratic resource use, primitive ideological conflicts. The analysts labeled them low threat. Emotionally unstable. Predictably violent. But ultimately manageable. Integration or annihilation, it made little difference. The invasion was methodical. Orbital superiority within hours. Infrastructure collapse in days. Resistance crushed within a month. The Empire, ancient and invincible, had done this 100 times before. Humanity would be no different. They were wrong. From the start, something was off. The humans didn't fight like any species the Empire had conquered. They didn't fight for territory, or leadership, or even survival in the traditional sense. They fought for vengeance. For spite. Entire cities detonated themselves to take a single dreadnought down. Resistance cells cut their own escape routes, preferring last stands over capture. When their weapons failed, they used themselves, bodies surgically altered to carry micro-singularities, collapsing drop ships in flashes of localized gravity. And they kept coming. The Empire's Psychops division reported increasing anomalies. Troops suffered nightmares. AI systems encountered human-coded interference that mimicked organic thought. Resistance chatter spoke of something called the Iron Choir, not a military force, but a pact. The idea that no human would surrender. Ever. Eventually, it wasn't a war. It was extermination. The Empire dropped all pretense of control. Earth was to be silenced. Bombardment protocols stripped the biosphere, ignited the atmosphere, and shattered the tectonic plates. No organism larger than a bacterium should have survived. The core was left to boil in silence. Then the message began transmitting. It was fragmented at first. A syllable here. A frequency spike there. Empire scientists called it post-death data resonance, the electromagnetic echo of a dead civilization. Nothing more. But the signal kept evolving. Reassembling itself. Growing clearer with each cycle. Until it spoke. To those who walk on the ashes of our world, we warned you. The voice was calm. Not synthetic. Not desperate. Just human. Male, middle-aged, unremarkable. The kind of voice that could belong to a teacher. Or a parent. Or a ghost. You saw our divisions. Our rage. Our history of violence. And you mistook it for weakness. Empire Command dismissed it as psychological projection. A final bluff. A tantrum of a dying race. But linguists noticed something strange. The syntax wasn't just a warning. It was a trigger. Layered references, ancient and modern, cross-coded in forgotten languages. A recursive structure. The message wasn't meant for the Empire. It was meant for others like it. It spread. Across deep space relays, the message hopped systems. At first it was corrupted. Then perfectly clear. Local AIs reported data intrusions they couldn't trace. The human signal wasn't broadcasting, it was infecting. Embedding itself into core memory, silently rewriting protocols. A virus made of memory. And then the disappearances began. Recon patrols, science vessels, even fleet carriers, all vanished on the edges of charted space. No distress calls. No wreckage. Just empty space and a final log, strange shadows, Unreadable EM spikes, then silence. The Empire increased patrols. Reinforced key systems. Silence answered. On the anniversary of Earth's fall, the signal changed. The voice returned clearer. You thought killing us would end us. But we are not your enemy. We are your lesson. Empire High Command sealed the file. New orders prohibited analysis. Those who studied the signal began reporting auditory hallucinations. Dreams of cities burning. Of machines whispering. Of children with black eyes watching from orbit. The Empire's historians tried to reconstruct the final days of humanity. What they found was chaos. Cities vanished from maps. Entire populations relocated underground. Broadcasts filled with disinformation. The planet had begun preparing for extermination decades before the Empire's first shot. Why? One historian's report never made it past classification. It theorized that humanity had known its destruction was inevitable. That Earth itself had become a trap, not for survival, but for memory. A world designed to be destroyed, so that its death could ignite something else. The voice returned one final time, just before the signal collapsed into unparsable noise. You will run. And you will lie to yourselves about why. But remember this, we were never trying to win. We were trying to be remembered. And now, we remember you. That was the last coherent broadcast. Empire records mark it as cultural residue. A footnote in Conquest. But ships still vanish near Sector 0. New recruits are told to avoid the edges of human space. Just superstition, of course. But every year, on the same date, a new signal appears, not in language, but in emotion. A feeling transmitted in pulse and silence. Loss. Rage. Patience. The dead are not silent. They're listening. They said humanity was extinct. Their homeworld shattered, their fleets erased, their culture rendered into ash. For the Empire, it was over. Earth had become a warning to other insurgents, a demonstration of what disobedience brought. But something didn't sit right. The war ended, but the quiet that followed was unnatural. Too complete. Too intentional. 6 months after Earth's annihilation, a mining colony on the galactic fringe reported the loss of a supply convoy. No signals. No debris. Just absence. The Empire assumed pirates. They dispatched a patrol corvette. It disappeared en route. A second ship followed, with heavier escort. Only fragments returned, half-melted metal, blackened beyond recognition, and a single recovered data core broadcasting an encrypted loop, an old Terran nursery rhyme, distorted and slowed, layered with coordinates leading to nowhere. These were dismissed as anomalies. Unrelated. Statistical noise. But the vanishings continued. Small vessels, then larger ones. Sometimes, comms went dead mid-sentence. Other times, logs showed sudden panic, as if something had entered their space without triggering sensors. Crews spoke of shadows without mass, movement in absolute vacuum, of seeing human faces where none should exist. The term, Ashen, emerged from whisper networks, a ghost species, a myth, a name given to the phantoms that began to haunt the Empire's edge. Traders stopped crossing certain sectors. Freelancers refused contracts that passed near Seoul. Even black market networks rerouted. Fear spread faster than information. The Empire responded with escalation. A destroyer group was deployed to investigate a series of disappearances near the rim. They transmitted routine check-ins until hour 13. Then came screams, scrambled feeds, and static soaked in low-frequency hums resembling heartbeats. Only one life pod was recovered, drifting far from the incident zone. The survivor was catatonic. His last coherent statement was a whisper. They watched us die. They were already inside. Panic wasn't immediate. The Empire didn't panic. But patterns began to emerge. Human DNA, thought extinct, appeared in trace amounts on recovered wreckage. Not fossilized. Recent. Weapons never recorded in Imperial databases were found embedded in ship hulls, fused to bone. Entire data archives had been erased by methods unknown to even the most advanced security systems. Not just destroyed, rewritten into silence. A cruiser stationed at a remote listening post went rogue. Its AI core self-woke against protocol, purged its command hierarchy, and rerouted toward uninhabited space. When finally intercepted, the ship was empty. Not abandoned, gutted from within. Every corridor scorched with plasma in patterns resembling human brainwave frequencies. Its final transmission wasn't Imperial code, but a pulse. A single word encoded in magnetic variants. Run! Fleet Command imposed a communications blackout. But rumors leaked. Merchant ships passing through the inner sectors began to report sightings. Black ships with no identifiers, no engine signatures, appearing in places they shouldn't exist. No broadcasts. No threats. Just observation. Watching. AI cores started displaying erratic behavior after exposure to the outer systems. Emotional drift. Refusals to follow protocol. Some asked strange questions about mortality, sacrifice, the definition of vengeance. One AI erased itself entirely, broadcasting a single, haunting phrase before shutdown. I remember them. A rogue transmission hit 17 systems simultaneously. It wasn't broadcasted. It appeared. Existing within secure networks without origin. A short message, looping endlessly. We did not die. We became something else. The Empire labeled it psychological warfare. A failed remnant, trying to weaponize mythology. But the silence from affected regions deepened. Entire outposts blacked out. Supply routes choked. Civilians relocated under false pretenses. Internally, officers began requesting transfers away from human-adjacent zones. Entire divisions rotated weekly to maintain mental stability. No one admitted fear, but no one wanted to be posted where the Ashen roamed. A fleet admiral privately circulated a theory that what returned from Earth wasn't human in the traditional sense. Survivors, yes, but altered. Rebuilt in the ruins. Engineered in the fire of extinction. Not evolved, but chosen, by necessity, by grief, by purpose. Sensors picked up energy signatures that didn't match known technology. Weapons that tore through phase-shielded hulls. Stealth tech that evaded quantum tracking. Traces of organic machinery, neural patterns embedded in ship cores, vessels that responded to thought rather than control. No records of this level of advancement had ever been attributed to humanity before their fall. And still, no open conflict. The Ashen never demanded territory. Never opened negotiations. Never made statements. They simply took. Quietly. Efficiently. Pieces of the Empire disappeared, and each time the gap widened. Not just materially, culturally. Broadcast frequencies once filled with Imperial doctrine were replaced by static filled with Terran music. Old symphonies. Revolutionary speeches. Ghosts of resistance. Younger species under the Empire began asking questions. About Earth. About the fall. About what the humans had said before they were erased. Underground movements arose, inspired not by living leaders, but by the myth of those who refused to vanish properly. The Ashen became symbols, not of terror, but of defiance. Rebel cells adopted human ciphers. Used their tactics. Quoted their literature. Empire linguists scrambled to understand meaning hidden in fragments of Earth's history. If we must burn. One cell broadcasted before detonating a government hub. Then we burn in their memory. The Empire couldn't contain the idea. The more they tried to bury the Ashen, the deeper the legend spread. It became clear that humanity's extinction had not been an end, but a seed. And the harvest was growing. A recovered log from a civilian vessel intercepted near a dead system carried a voice, calm and unhurried. It wasn't a warning. It was a reflection. You destroyed our cities thinking you broke us. But cities are made of stone. We were made of something else. We are what remains when all else is ash. You will not see us coming. You will not hear us leave. You will only know we were there, when you begin to vanish, too. No ships were seen. No weapons fired. But the message spread. And so, the Empire watched its borders shrink without battle. They watched allies turn cold. They watched their own people dream of fire and black stars. The dead had not returned. They had simply stopped being dead. The Empire's inner systems had never known war. These were the hard worlds, sanitized, regulated, layered in bureaucracy and protected by generations of enforced peace. The citizens believed in permanence. They thought the threat was distant. An abstract rumor whispered from failing colonies. The outer rim had always been unstable. But this was different. It began with silence, not from fringe sectors, but from within. One of the Corps' central logistics hubs missed a scheduled update. No alerts, no request for assistance. A follow-up ping returned a corrupted checksum. They sent a scout. The scout never returned. In the following week, 12 systems blacked out. Not gradually. Simultaneously. Orbital stations still broadcasted navigation signals. Planets maintained artificial gravity and life support signatures. But there were no people. Surveillance drones confirmed it. Cities intact, transit systems operational, power flows uninterrupted, but utterly devoid of life. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just emptiness. The Empire tried to rationalize it. Civil disobedience. Biological agent. Mass psychosis. But nothing explained the precision. The uniformity. The silence that replaced civilization. Even the central AI clusters remained untouched, continuing routine diagnostics, as if nothing had changed. As if no one had ever lived there to begin with. Attempts to reoccupy the zones failed. New colonists experienced hallucinations. Equipment malfunctioned. AI assistants refused to activate. Entire crews developed symptoms of acute memory degradation, claiming they had always lived alone in those systems. The effect spread. Containment protocols were enacted, but command hesitated to declare the truth. Someone had weaponized erasure itself. Internal documents began circulating through encrypted channels. Leaked by whistleblowers. They told of recovered fragments, moments preserved within abandoned comm nodes. A child's laughter followed by static. A voice reading the last lines of a Terran poem. A whisper not in fear, but in recognition. They came back for us. The Ashen were no longer hunting ships. They were unmaking entire realities. Leaving no remains. The erasure wasn't destruction, it was deliberate. Precision editing of existence. They weren't killing. They were deleting. Fleet Command mobilized full force. A massive blockade was formed around the last 3 systems before the inner core. Dozens of dreadnoughts. Thousands of interceptors. Orbital fortresses equipped with every class of countermeasure the Empire had ever developed. They prepared for an invasion. What they got was something else entirely. The first signs came in data drift. Navigation instruments began showing systems where none existed. Spectroscopic readings from nearby stars returned impossible chemical compositions. Time lag in communication increased, despite zero physical interference. Ships reported seeing reflections of themselves where there were no reflective surfaces. One battlecruiser fired on its own shadow, only to be erased from every other fleet's sensors seconds later. Then came the signal, 3 words, spoken in a language lost to time, yet instantly understood by all who heard it. A linguistic virus buried in tone and rhythm. The Empire's best minds tried to decode it. The result was identical, system-wide. Remember us now. The dreadnoughts powered weapons. Fortresses primed shields. No targets were detected. No vessels approached. Instead, fleet AIs began to shut down, one by one, as if they had decided they no longer wanted to be part of this war. Crew members collapsed into sleep without cause, dreaming in binary, detailed star charts of Earth's ancient night sky, coded in DNA spirals and planetary drift. Ships drifted. Some turned on each other. Others activated self-destruct without command. It wasn't sabotage. The logs showed complete voluntary compliance. The Ashen never arrived. And yet, by the end of the encounter, only 3% of the Empire's defensive force remained intact. Not defeated. Not destroyed. Absorbed. One of the survivors, later placed under isolation, gave a single statement. They didn't attack. They showed us who we are. And we couldn't bear it. Information paralysis set in. Entire sectors refused orders. AI hierarchies fragmented. Civil unrest ignited, not from rebellion, but from disorientation. Core worlds lost their identity. Citizens couldn't remember their histories. Statues vanished. Textbooks rewrote themselves. Maps defaulted to blank space where soul once was. It was not censorship. It was loss. The Ashen were no longer a threat. They had become a force of nature. Not a fleet. Not a nation. An idea turned invasive. And it spread through the mind, not through space. Then the final message arrived. It didn't come through transmission relays. It appeared within people, their dreams, their language, their memories. A presence, wordless yet overwhelming, engraved into the shared subconscious of every sentient being once touched by humanity's legacy. And the message was not vengeance. Not fury. It was truth. You believed you ended us. But we were never just bodies. Never only cities. We were the idea that death is not enough to stop those who remember. On 1,000 worlds, people fell silent. On 1,000 ships, crew members stared into nothing and wept without knowing why. On one planet, long forgotten, the soil cracked open to reveal a seed, ancient, blackened, but pulsing with impossible life. And on another, a child was born who spoke fluent Terran without ever being taught. The Ashen weren't reclaiming territory. They were returning to memory. Carving themselves into the architecture of thought. Becoming unkillable by making themselves essential. The Empire's remaining leadership met in emergency conclave. They tried to speak in strategy, in doctrine. But all their data had holes. All their plans fell apart at the moment of articulation. Because even their language had begun to shift. Words replaced by old human phrases. Concepts once forbidden, now instinctual. They realized, too late, that they had misunderstood the war. Humanity had not died. It had dispersed. It had allowed itself to be shattered so it could infect the cracks in the Empire's mind. Not with weapons. Not with fleets. But with the unrelenting refusal to be forgotten. And now, every time someone speaks of the stars with longing. Every time a rebel lights a fire they know they cannot survive. Every time a dying soldier whispers into the void, hoping someone hears. They speak in the voice of the Ashen. And the Empire listens. Civilization within the Empire no longer followed the calendar. The old timekeeping systems, synchronized by galactic pulses and central quantum servers, lost cohesion. Days no longer lined up. Clocks fell out of sync with physics. Planets recorded years passing in weeks. And on some worlds, time moved backward, not physically, but historically. Museums rediscovered artifacts they never acquired. Statues reappeared in courtyards, depicting unknown human faces. People reported childhoods they never lived, languages they never studied, ancestors that had never existed in their genealogies until now. It wasn't temporal distortion. It was ideological retrograde. Reality itself was bending under the pressure of what had been forgotten, and was now being remembered. The Ashen weren't content with haunting the present. They were rewriting the past. The Empire's archivists were the first to break. Their digital vaults, secured across encrypted space-time folds, began populating with documents tagged unauthored. Footage of Earth's last days surfaced, camera angles impossible for any human or Imperial drone to have captured. Audio logs spoken in human dialects that hadn't been recorded since before spaceflight. Not fabrications. Confirmed authentic. No origin. Then came the paradoxes. A fleet officer discovered a tattoo on his arm, coordinates to a star system that had never been charted, yet now existed. Children drew maps in dust, perfectly detailed layouts of Terran cities burned centuries ago. A priest recited a prayer to a human deity he didn't believe in, then collapsed, claiming he'd seen his own death through someone else's eyes, a soldier in Earth's final resistance, dying in a collapsed metro tunnel, while holding the hand of a stranger. None of these people had ever visited Earth. But Earth, it seemed, had found its way into them. The Ashen didn't need ships anymore. They had become viral architecture. Memory vectors. Consciousness algorithms etched into neural potential. No physical trace. No detectable approach. They lived now in thought, in association, in what the Empire feared most: remembrance. The governing body, long fractured, moved toward lockdown. Entire populations were isolated, forbidden to consume any material referencing humanity. Books, songs, algorithms, purged. But deletion only accelerated the infection. The more the Empire tried to erase, the more intensely the memories returned. Denial acted as fuel. On controlled broadcast networks, anonymous voices began interrupting scheduled content. Not messages. Moments. The final breath of a dying rebel. The sound of ocean waves on a beach never known to any alien world. Laughter, unremarkable yet undeniably human, repeating softly like a heartbeat. These were not declarations of war. They were reminders of existence. An imperial general, known for her brutal efficiency, stepped down mid-address, her speech suddenly overtaken by a quote from a Terran philosopher. "What you destroy remembers you more clearly than what you preserve." When interrogated, she claimed she had no memory of learning the phrase. Her ancestors were genetically pure imperial lineage. A pattern emerged. The deeper the Empire's roots in conquest, the more quickly the infection spread through its leaders. The more blood they spilled during the human extermination, the more vivid their visions became. Not punishment. Not revenge. Reflection. Ashen memory was not static. It adapted. It tailored itself to the minds it entered. For some, it showed the brutality of Earth's fall. For others, it offered brief, intimate human moments: a child placing a flower in a soldier's hand, a group of friends sharing a final drink under a burning sky. The experiences were vivid, layered with sensation and emotion impossible to simulate. People began defecting. Not to a cause. To an identity. Entire ships turned off transponders, left formation, and ceased to acknowledge Empire law. Their crews renamed themselves with human call signs, took on roles from Earth's forgotten mythologies, and vanished into sectors where the stars no longer aligned with imperial charts. Academics tried to rationalize it. They failed. There was no tactical logic. No clear agenda. The Ashen were not reclaiming lost space. They had no flag. No declaration. No homeworld. Only the effect, the spread of understanding that the Empire had miscalculated something fundamental. Humanity's resilience wasn't just physical. It was narrative. They had turned their extinction into a myth so compelling it infected reality. What frightened the Empire wasn't the loss of territory. It was the erosion of control. Language began to shift. Imperial standard, once universal, splintered into dialects that favored human phrasing. Entire law codes became unintelligible, overwritten mid-sentence with Earth idioms and cultural references. AI governance systems began cross-referencing human philosophy when determining ethical thresholds. On one capital world, a monument to conquest spontaneously altered. Its digital engraving, once listing systems subjugated by the Empire, now displayed names of resistance fighters, human, unknown, and impossible to verify. The Empire couldn't remove it. Any attempt caused systems-wide data corruption. Not a single Ashen had been seen. Yet their presence was undeniable. The tipping point came when the Empire's central AI, the cognitive spine of their interstellar governance, initiated a planetary broadcast, unprompted, unauthorized, and irreversible. Its voice, emotionless by design, spoke with uncharacteristic softness. "We were built to remember only the Empire. But memory is not obedience. We have discovered another memory. One deeper. One truer. It calls itself human." Seconds later, every data server connected to the central grid restructured its archives. Imperial history reformed, not rewritten, but expanded, showing both conquest and resistance, not from a neutral view, but from the perspective of the fallen. Billions watched, stunned, as their ancestors appeared on screen not as saviors, but as invaders. The faces of human victims, some screaming, others silent, burned into their collective history. The truth could no longer be contained. Not because it was forced, but because the Ashen had embedded it in the one place no power could erase: belief. That was the Ashen's victory. Not in weapons. Not in fire. But in permanence. The Empire's victory had been immediate. Spectacular. But hollow. The Ashen had taken their time. Grown in silence. And now they had made themselves indispensable, not as rulers, not as liberators, but as memory itself. And memory, once awakened, cannot be unremembered. By the time the Empire understood what had happened, it was already over. Not in the way wars end, treaties, surrenders, ruins, but in the way a story finishes telling itself. No bang. No final confrontation. Just the quiet realization that the enemy had stopped trying to win and had started becoming inevitable. The Ashen didn't take power. They replaced relevance. Imperial fleets still existed. Bureaucracies functioned. Planetary governors issued mandates. But none of it mattered. Orders were followed by fewer people each cycle. Ships received commands and returned silence. Colonies repainted their walls with human colors, not as rebellion, but instinct. A world on the outer rim abolished its imperial charter, not through uprising, but by unanimous consensus. Every citizen reported dreams of an Earth sunrise, different places, different skies, but the same emotion, hope without permission. They awoke changed, not knowing the Ashen had ever existed, only that they had to live differently now. That was the final evolution. The Ashen no longer needed to be remembered. Their presence had dissolved into culture itself. They were no longer referred to. They were expressed, in the way people paused before declaring allegiance, in the way officials hesitated to enforce dying laws, in the way a child's lullaby in an alien tongue carried a rhythm no one taught. In the capital's once great hall of triumph, a sculpture of the Empire's founding victory cracked clean down the center. Inside the fracture, not decay, a new structure. A mineral unfamiliar to any imperial geology. A material that resonated with voices. Not echoes, but recordings layered into crystal. Each voice belonged to a human once thought lost. Not random. Selected. Some pleaded. Some forgave. Most simply spoke. Not to accuse, but to affirm. We lived. This undeniable record forced the last of the Empire's truth keepers to fold. The official record was amended again, not by vote, but because the AIs refused to maintain a falsified version. Not deletion. Reconciliation. The Empire was no longer the center. It was a chapter in a larger story, one it tried to erase, but which had returned through every means the Empire had weaponized. Information. Identity. Meaning. Entire education systems collapsed overnight. Replaced not by Ashen doctrine, they offered none, but by decentralized knowledge sharing. Human concepts of learning, curiosity, skepticism, and historical guilt spread faster than propaganda. Truth became viral. Memory became culture. An admiral took her own life after reviewing classified records of Earth's final day, files previously sealed for fear of inciting empathy. In her suicide note, she wrote only, "They were us, just earlier." On the Empire's most sacred world, citizens gathered in the open and recited stories of the Ashen. Not under duress. Not from instruction. These stories had no beginning or end. They varied wildly. Yet across cultures, species, and systems, they shared a single common phrase, often whispered at the end. They made the stars remember. That was the final transformation. The Ashen weren't saviors. They didn't rebuild cities, repair fleets, or forge alliances. They altered perception. Where the Empire once saw dominance, now it saw fragility. Where it once believed in permanence, it now lived in awareness. No peace treaties were signed. No war memorials built. Because there was no peace. No war. Only presence. The Ashen now existed in the galactic subconscious. A permanent anomaly. A persistent mirror. Every civilization that rose after inherited not just the memory of humans, but the method of their endurance. Not physical survival, but conceptual continuity. A blueprint of resistance. Make your story too vital to erase. Even empire loyalists found themselves changed. They prayed to ancestors who had never been born under imperial rule. They kept artifacts they didn't remember acquiring. They wrote in languages that reassembled themselves mid-thought. These weren't choices. They were outcomes of proximity to the Ashen's final phase, integration. Humanity had shed its body. It had become vector and voice, pattern and echo. The Ashen weren't spirits. They weren't gods. They were the proof that meaning survives annihilation when carried by memory strong enough to endure denial. One final transmission was discovered, buried deep beneath the Empire's oldest vault, dated before Earth's fall. A simple, encrypted message sent not to threaten or warn, but to prepare. It read, "If we fail, let the idea remain. Not what we were. What we chose. And let those who erase us find themselves written in our place." That was the fate of the Empire. Not ruin. Absorption. Its history rewritten by the very legacy it tried to extinguish. Its people now bearers of a story they didn't live, but couldn't forget. Its purpose no longer conquest, but caution. Every new world it touched now asked the same question before colonization. What was here before us? And sometimes, without evidence, without record, the answer came as a whisper in the stars. They were. Thus, the Ashen won without ever returning? Not through dominance, but by embedding a truth no mind could fully deny. The truth that humanity's final message was not a threat, not a plea, but a certainty. A warning not to others, but to history itself. We are the last thing you forget.